Support for Veterans Corner Radio is made possible by M&M Printing and the Observer News of Ruskin, Florida.
Hello and welcome to Veterans Corner Radio Podcasts, information for and about veterans. For this podcast, host Joe Mulberger talks with former United States Marine Corps Gunnery Sergeant Sgt Porthouse. Today, you'll meet Gunnery Sgt Porthouse and learn about his out-of-the-norm experiences as a person deployed to a combat zone, as well as personal experiences of a unique kind as he traveled around the world. Here now is Joe Mulberger with Veterans Corner Radio on Veterans Corner Radio Podcasts.
Welcome to Veterans Corner Radio, a show dedicated to providing information to all those who have served our country's military and to their families. Now, here is your host, combat veteran and educator, retired United States Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Joe Mulberger.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's show. You're listening to Veterans Corner Radio, and I'm your host, Joe Mulberger. Today we have United States Marine Corps veteran Sgt Porthouse. Josh, tell us a little bit about yourself. When were you born and where was that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am your pretty stereotypical millennial. I feel entitled about a lot of things and realize I'm wrong after the fact. So I was born in 1987 in Pasco County, Florida. Matter of fact, between Newport Richey, Holiday is pretty much where I grew up.
Tell us about the things you got into when you were growing up. Were you involved in sports? Did you have a special activity that you got into when you were in high school or just growing up in general?
I did, actually. I tried the stuff like most kids do. You try out soccer and t-ball and basketball, but I don't think I broke 3 feet tall till I was in like 5th grade or something. So none of those sports really worked well for me. As you might imagine, in fact, they worked against me quite often. So I don't remember how old I was, but my mom got my older brother and I involved in Taekwondo and martial arts, and I basically stuck with that all the way through till I graduated high school. So during high school, I didn't actually have time to do anything.
Because you were so busy with Taekwondo?
Actually, yeah. I went to school, I'm going to say around 8 a.m. to 3 as a stereotypical schedule, but by the time school was over, I had about a half hour to get over to the studio and prep for the after-school program. And then they had an hour to get their homework done and an hour of class. And then we had evening classes to run. And then I would train until about 9-ish. And then I'd have to mop and clean up and lock up at 10 and go home and get dinner. So that was 5 days a week. I mean, that was my full-time schedule all the way through high school, all 4 years. And I didn't have, I guess, too much of a life around that, socially, financially, or otherwise. And that's probably what set me up, or at least psychographically, in the way I viewed the world. I'd say maybe even a work ethic.
And your after-school activity was Taekwondo?
It was, yeah. So I was the head instructor for the after-school program, and we had, I think at most, probably somewhere around 4 or 5 dozen kids.
Wait a minute. You were the instructor, and you were one of the high school students that was running this?
Yeah.
There's a little bit more to, I was in this after-school program. How did you develop to become an instructor? And then in high school, you were the after-school program for Taekwondo instructor.
Well, so keep in mind, that was when I was maybe 15, I think. And by that point, I had already been training for about a decade, competing, Battle of Atlanta, and a few other, regional tournaments and things. And anyway, long story short, I had gotten my third-degree black belt in Taekwondo by the time I was 15, and sort of eminently qualified to do it.
Josh, answering the next question is just a foregone conclusion on if you've been kicking ass since you were 15 and training others to do the same, going to the Marine Corps seemed like a natural step forward. So, all right, humor us. What was it? Well, first of all, what year did you graduate from high school?
2005.
And what year did you go into the Marine Corps?
December 2009.
Okay, so there's a couple of years in between there. What takes place with Josh Porthouse between high school graduation and those couple of years before you go into the Marine Corps?
College.
College. What did you do in college?
So I went to St. Leo University in St. Leo, Florida, and I tried to major in a few different things and figure out, like every other college kid, who I was and what I was interested in. But I eventually settled on business and graduated with a bachelor's. 4.5 years after I stopped.
So when you went into the Marine Corps, did you go in as an officer or did you go in as an enlisted guy?
Well, both. Initially in 2008, I made an attempt. I went to OCS for the Marine Corps up in Quantico. And 5 weeks into the 10-week program, I was medically separated and sent home. And I guess I got to thinking that following senior year that it didn't make much sense for me to go back there when I had no idea what the enlisted guys were doing. And so I couldn't justify it, I guess. And then that was it. Then I graduated, and my cousin and I enlisted at the same time. And off we went to Paris Island, January 11th, 2010.
So everyone in the Marine is an infantryman. And then what, in addition to being an infantryman, did you do, if anything at all?
Interrogation, actually. So my primary focus for the first decade of my career revolved around the infantry and within the infantry. Eventually, I got to be a platoon sergeant. I was in a combined anti-armor team, CAT team, if that's more familiar to the listeners. I was, at one point, acting platoon commander. I was doing pretty well for myself, but I couldn't do anything more. I had deployed 6 times in my first 10 years, and I basically burnt myself out. There was no upward mobility left for me, and I got bored. And I said, I'm either going to get out when this becomes a job, or I'm going to find something new and change it up. And so I did. 2019, I lap moved and basically redesignated as an interrogator. And that's when I got into intel.
So how many years were you in altogether?
16 total.
Okay. So too few years to retire, or was there some kind of a carrot and stick in front of, a carrot on a stick in front of you that said, hey, you can actually retire after 16 years, and then you were able to take advantage of that?
No, that would have been nice. It wasn't early release. It wasn't medical. It wasn't anything really beneficial to me long term, I guess you could say, professional. But personally, there was. And I don't know if I got put. I don't like playing the victim card, but I didn't have enough insight or foresight to say that I really got myself into this. Either way, I got a call from the monitor, the guy that assigns us our new jobs or whatever, and he said, hey, Gunny, you can go, a couple different options overseas for your last contract and your Twilight Tour, as we called it. And I said, all right, well, my son lives in Tampa. Send me to McDill. And he said, no, we're not doing that. I said, well, I'll stay 30 years. I don't care. I'll homestead in Tampa. Just find me a spot in McDill. And he said, I'll tell you what, if you want to go to Tampa, Germany or Tampa, Japan, I'll send you. And I said, what? No, those are my only options? Absolutely not. No, I'm going to go to Tampa. And he said, all right, well, you're going to have to go as a reservist or you're going to have to go as a civilian. I said, well, then, if those are my options, I'm out. And so just shy of 14 years, I got off active duty and spent the last 2 years in the reserve and got down to Tampa. And it got to a point where due to some administrative changes, policy changes, some Department of War changes and updates, that's basically it for me. So I'm not going to be able to finish out the full point.
So you end up in Tampa, but in the Marines, when you first came out of basic training and your trade school, where was your first base of assignment?
Marine Corps Air Ground Combat Center, 29 Palms, California.
And what was the sort of traditional day in the life of Josh Porthouse at that time? As I would imagine, what were you, a PFC or something like that?
Absolutely. Well, initially, a day in the life was just PT pretty much all the time because there's nothing to do within 5 miles of that entire combat center. Now, here's an interesting fact for you, though, Joe. The Marine Corps Air Ground Combat Center, McCagty, as we called it, 29 Palms, is the largest Marine Corps base in terms of land area in the United States. And so really, especially in the infantry, the blessing in disguise being stationed there for 4.5 years is you can train on every weapon system. You can go out for days, for weeks, months in some cases, and train. So you really have every opportunity, especially between there and then partnering with training areas at Camp Pendleton in San Diego. You really have every opportunity as an infantryman in the Marine Corps to excel. I mean, it's your career to lose at that point. You can literally get exposure to anything.
Now, somebody that was an instructor in high school for Taekwondo, now you're in the Marines, you're in 29 Palms, you're there for, 4.5 years, and you have the opportunity to learn every weapon system. Did you take advantage of that and learn every weapon system?
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say at least as far as what the combat arms community surrounding the Marine Corps infantry entailed. I didn't get into like sniper rifles, for example, but we were able to cross train on mortars and machine guns. I initially, when I got out of infantry school, or more specifically, the School of Infantry East at Camp Lejeune, my primary MOS was what we called a tow gunner, or an anti-tank guided missileman, or foreman. And so our primary weapon system was an M240 Bravo, basically like a modern M60.
Now, wait a minute. An M60. What's an M60? Is that a grenade launcher?
No. So think more Vietnam era. M60 had a tripod, fired 7.62 millimeter rounds, a bipod rather, and it was a brake medium machine gun and belt fed. Well, the M240, same sort of idea. It fired 7.62, and it was off of a bipod, and same sort of concept. It's a little bit more modern tech, but technically, our secondary weapon system was an actual missile launcher, and so you could fire it from the tripod, or you could fire it from a turret on, say, a Humvee, or eventually what became the MAT-Vs or MRAPs, but it was turret mounted or ground mounted, and that was a lot of fun. That was a lot of fun. I remember the first time I shot my first missile, and then after that, I probably only shot it, I think, 4 or 5 more times, maybe 6 in my career. But, they're $18,000 missiles, and eventually Raytheon says, all right, practice is over.
So tell us about how many times did you deploy?
Overall, I think 8 times, but basically 6 of those were in my first 10 years. And that's, like I said, that's essentially what contributed, I guess you could say, to my downfall. That kind of work ethic or ambition or drive that I was describing about in high school, it didn't really bother me too much. My high school girlfriend broke up with me, and that was, manageable, but it wasn't like because I was married to work. She just found other people she rather spend time with. But me being that ambitious in what I was passionate about sort of became like a hyperfixation on, I don't know, maybe not the adrenaline, but like the progression, just learning new stuff, just doing things all the time. And then in return, it was way easier for me to learn things by teaching. So it was just a natural progression. Deploying then in those 10 years.
Did you end up deploying to Iraq or Afghanistan or both?
I did, yeah, to Afghanistan. And that's sort of the point I'm getting at. For me, that was the biggest impact personally, professionally, on my outlook, on my worldview, everything. And, those first 6 deployments as a whole, though, think about it in terms of 10 years in the Marine Corps, most of our deployments are about 7 months. And so what you're looking at then at that point is 42 months-ish deployed. So we're talking 3.5 years deployed out of the first 10. And then every other month we were out training. And so of the remaining 6.5 years, I mean, whatever the math is, we're looking at about 30 months, 3 years, give or take, out training and still not at home with your family, right? So then you only get 3 years out of 10. I mean, it's a jail sentence, So it was great for me professionally. It was horrible for me personally. And so I developed an estranged relationship with my son. I ended up getting divorced from my first wife and, spending whatever money I had frivolously like every other young 20-year-old, I suppose. But I had one thing I think that was the saving grace based on that deployment to Afghanistan, and that was perspective in empathy. I didn't have it before. I didn't even recognize it before because I was so focused on what I was doing, not who I was helping. Afghanistan was different. It was a total perspective shift for me. I mean, foundationally, in terms of character, empathy, stewardship of the skill sets that I did have, the strengths that I did have, let alone the military application of those things in a deployed environment. So, it was a busy initial decade, but in that regard.
So when military members are deployed, there's the whole, as I describe it, you're about to cross a border into a place that combat is going on. And the thought in one's mind far too often is, the place is exploding into flames all of the time, and there's firefights going on all of the time. And then you arrive and it's not that way. And then you get the occasional incursions and things like that. Did you ever end up in like a serious firefight?
No, not directly. We expected, or at least I expected, 24/7 that there was going to be a complex ambush every time I went pee, and that wasn't the case. In fact, just walking to the chow hall, we had to pass through the bazaar to get there, and so surrounded by anybody, and all the stories we heard, especially in the workup, was blue on green, friendly fire, and just all of these stories that most were rooted in fact, obviously, but the firsthand experience, I mean, it's like looking at an overhead map image of an area and then walking on the ground. You don't recognize what you saw on the map when you're on the ground initially. And vice versa, on the ground to look at a map, you're like, I wasn't even there. What am I looking at? Same sort of disparity, so from what we heard and what we were trained to accomplish, and then to actually meet some of the people. I'm not saying they're all necessarily in this category, because they certainly aren't. But of the ones I was lucky enough to meet, call it divine intervention or not, I don't know. We had encounters, I guess you could say, with IEDs, with people that were very much trying to either date us or put an American knots on their belt. We had, and I'm talking the men, we had all sorts of different occasions to meet key leaders and go on foot patrols, walking everywhere, as you might imagine, in the infantry. And on occasion, we were lucky enough to be in vehicles. But even then, the only thing I think that kept me going, especially in hindsight, probably just the passion for the job and the field craft, because it was fun. And then when I got back home, life wasn't that way.
So you ended up leaving from California. You end up in Afghanistan. Now you're back in California, or where are you when you come back from Afghanistan?
At the time, yeah, I left 29 Palms for that deployment and then returned back to 29 Palms. Yeah.
Do you have another assignment after that? Do you go someplace else?
Dude, my first 3 deployments were my first 4 years.
Okay. And then you end up 3 deployments. Were they all to Afghanistan?
No. So the one was, obviously. The other 2 are called MU, Marine Expeditionary Unit. So we were on a boat. The Navy taxied us around the Pacific, do whatever we had to do for a training exercise or emergency response or whatever. And then that's basically it for 7 months. And then we ended up back at 29 Palms.
So you have a detailer and you come back to 29 Palms. Obviously, in 4 some years, you don't go from PFC to gunnery sergeant. Where else does the Marine Corps take Josh Porthouse?
Well, all over the place, actually, with the exception of Africa, South America, and Antarctica, every other continent, and actually every ocean throughout my career. Crossing the equator was cool with a shellback ceremony. And then I got snowed on in the middle of the ocean without seeing land. In the middle of the night, no clouds as far as I could tell. I was on the well deck on one of these views. I was on the well deck and I was on vehicle watch. And it was just, make sure the vehicles don't get stolen type Marine Corps logic, right? And so I'm watching the vehicles and I'm just looking around at nothing. It's pitch black. It's not like there's street lights or lights on the boat or anything. The only light that I see is bioluminescent phytoplankton. As the boat is cutting through the waves, they're like lightning in the water, moving through the wake towards the stern of the boat. And I remember looking down at them, and then, I mean, it was cold. At this point, we were in the Sea of Japan, I think, and it was winter. So, I had some sort of whatever it was, vortex or something on. And I just remember as I looked down at them in the water, and then I looked up at, I don't even know, man, hundreds of thousands of stars. Just an unbelievable thing to see in terms of just like cosmic grandeur, and it really brought me down into the moment. I wasn't missing home anymore. I wasn't hungry. I wasn't cold. I was just there looking at this IMAX dome, and then it started snowing from somewhere. I don't know. Actual flakes, not like flurries, like landing on the ground and pilot. And that, among a few other experiences around the world, I think there's only a handful of times in anybody's life where you get an experience like that just sort of rocks your core sense of self. and really puts the world into perspective. I pet a reindeer in the Arctic Circle. I walked through the Philippine jungle for 30 days without a shower. I traded mangoes and brandy, or I guess I would say I received mangoes and brandy for a workout shirt in the Philippines and in the jungle for that matter. It was such a crazy experience. And then obviously COVID impacted a lot. Policies changed and impacted a lot. And in my own experience, my own confidence and competence as I promoted, through the ranks, it's an incomparable experience that you really can't explain as well to anybody without the experience because there isn't anything else like it.
Well, it sounds like you've had quite a robust series of experiences that are absolutely outside of the realm of expectations. That expectation management when you kind of go into the service is, I'm going to be doing this G.I. Joe stuff and it's going to be going after bad guys or something along those lines. And you even admitted, you were trained on virtually every weapon system that you could possibly be trained on. You were in a combat zone and didn't have to employ any of those, but to a different perspective altogether, we flipped that completely upside down. And it's Marine Josh Porthouse who has experiences that absolutely you didn't go into the military going, I think I'm going to pet a reindeer, have it snow on me in the middle of the ocean, see plankton that's luminescent in the middle of the night. Those are the kind of things that you did not sign up for, but yet you are now a changed person having had those experiences. Unbelievable.
It really is. And a lot of that, not to say that it's my own doing. I didn't create the plankton or orchestrate the moment, right? But you have two options, and this is probably the most important lesson I learned throughout my entire career. You have two options for any scenario, any experience that for whatever reason you happen to be involved in. And one of them is you react, and one of them is you proact, right? And the difference being that victim card I talked about earlier. You're either going to defend what happened in this sort of reactive role, like, God, the recruiter really destroyed the op, whatever, like, okay, fine. But the degree of ownership, the degree of accountability that you can put into those same situations now is a proactive interpretation of those situations for any point in time in the future based on pattern recognition or whatever, right? So we did have some long days. I did wake up cold. I put on pants covered in ice that stood themselves up. I remember we got rained on and we hiked with somewhere around, this is like back in my day, uphill both ways kind of story. But I remember we hiked something like 12 miles in just outside Yosemite National Park at the Mountain Warfare Training Center with hats on and, weighted vests and weapons and all this other stuff on foot, all right, rappelling down walls and doing all kinds of really, really cool stuff that I got paid to do. And then we got rained on after 2 days of walking through the mountains at 8,000 feet up. And I came down with walking pneumonia. And we still had 2 more weeks of training to go. There wasn't anywhere for me to go. There's no hospital. There isn't anything. And so in those kinds of moments, being that cold, that wet, that hungry, you don't know what those things mean until you're in that position where you have no other option. Like, man, I didn't even know what this definition actually meant until now. It forces everything into perspective. And there's a little part of me that is still somewhere inside my psyche or my character or whatever, who's like, I don't want to repeat any of that. On the other hand, as an experience, on the other hand, now the greater majority of me is like, dude, that was the coolest thing I've ever done. And I appreciate it that now, for the most part, sans a few different experiences, I can talk about all of it from any perspective and really look back fondly at my career, despite what it's come to now, with total admiration.
Well, we've been talking with Marine Corps Gunnery Sergeant Josh Porthouse, and we're very glad that we had the time with you today, sir. And on Veterans Corner Radio, we say our veterans are worth their value in gold, and you have had experiences that are certainly much more valuable than gold could ever be, or any other precious gem or mineral.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much for your time, sir.
Joe, thanks for your time and having me on the show. I appreciate the opportunity.
Semper Fi.
Semper Fi.
You've been listening to Veterans Corner Radio with your host, retired United States Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Joe Mulberger. The views expressed on this program are those of Joe and his guests and are opinions based on the best available information. In matters of law or governmental regulation, it will always be best to check with the appropriate agency. Thanks for listening, and we hope you'll join us for the next program on Veterans Corner Radio.
Here's a quick final thought. If you're enjoying these podcasts, why not take a minute to subscribe or mark Veterans Corner Radio as a favorite? It's easy, and you'll be set to be among the first to find out when new podcasts are published. And thanks again for listening to Veterans Corner Radio.